I suppose for me, the whole idea of AIDS really brings me back to the early mid 80s. I lived in Belfast in the very early 80s, and it was a while before we started hearing about AIDS, and it was very remote and very, very scary. And of course, it was completely represented as the gay plague, which was absolutely terrifying. Round about, I think it was about the mid 80s, I moved to Cork, and I worked as part of a gay community in Cork. There's a place called the Key Co-op, which was brilliant, really, in the mid 80s, because the whole community got together. It was a cooperative, so there was like a food shop, a whole food shop. There was a whole food restaurant, cafe. There was a bookshop. There was a women's place. A lot of the gay organisations kind of operated out of there, so there was a whole sense of community. Mm-hmm. So when AIDS really started hitting the headlines and hitting the community, certainly the gay men, there was a palpable sense of fear, but also we have to do something about this. We have to take responsibility around this. We have to get together and see what we can do for our community. So in a sense, that was, although it was a terrible time, it was heartbreaking. It was also, it generated a kind of a collective community response, which I suppose was a good thing.
So every cloud with silver linings.
Well, yeah.
I suppose my first experience of World AIDS Day, and because my own perception of AIDS and HIV before is probably linked into what you were saying, there was the fear around it and the stigma attached to the LGBTQ community, and thinking, oh God, am I going to get this at some point? I didn't even know at that stage how I could get it, because that's how young I was. But the first time having an experience of World AIDS Day was through work. And at that point I was working for what's now called Start 360, was Opportunity Youth. And there was a big event and we went to it, and it was the first time I seen it was like a celebration of people who, had HIV or AIDS, and it was this collective coming together, linking into what you're saying, Paul, that there was hope through this, and that there is going to be a fight, and there was research, and that was, I think I was about 18 at that stage before I seen anything that could be even positively linked to this. So that's probably the first memory I would have of World AIDS Day.
For me, the whole thing around AIDS was, like, I remember it must have been around about 1987 they started having these advertisements on TV, and it's like, there is a monster stalking the land.
I've seen that.
And there was tombstones, and John Hurt, the actor, was his was the voiceover, and we don't know how you get it, but it was just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the way that I think in a way, despite all the stigma, and despite the prejudice, and the horror of the discrimination, in a sense, the way our community responded to that, in the end of the day, after a long period of hurt and distress and like burying our young men and older men as well, it was, I think that's what really gave rise to the whole pride thing. I think there became a point where people felt, okay, this disease is among us, and people are pointing the finger at us, and we're even lower on the scale than we used to be. Well, damn it, we're not taking that anymore.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that if the sort of stigma that you get, the way to counter that is to say, we're not taking that story. We're not believing that about ourselves. We know we're good. We are not what or who you say we are.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, where the whole pride thing really come up. Not that pride's perfect, but it's a hell of a difference between the late 80s and, like, certainly not this year because of COVID, but last year, the kind of celebrations there were of Pride in Belfast, and how many different communities are involved in that.
Yeah, and it is really inspiring, when you see even from my early days of Pride, which would have been mid-2000s, and it still, there would have been a lot of stuff where it would have been very HIV and AIDS focused, and those organisations that worked on behalf of those people who were positive would have been really prevalent. And I'm looking at it going, right, so the political aspect sometimes has fell away from Pride and it had become just a celebration and a party, which in one way is really great, but there still is a sort of battle that has to be sort of highlighted by our community, to say that we still have a fight on our hands for lots of different issues. And we're not just about a party and feathers and rainbows, and even people not knowing the rainbow flag is political in its own self, so there's loads of questions I would even have around Pride, and what you're saying, it's not perfect, but it's a damn sight better than what it was, years ago, and the crowds are amazing to see, and it is really inspirational, and seeing so many young people being involved in it is great.
It's great. I think I agree with you completely. I think it's a real pity that we've somehow lost the political message, and it's become all about marriage equality. Like, marriage equality is great. I campaign for marriage equality, but it's not the be all and end all.
No.
And for me, there's all sorts of issues now around young people who are trans or non-binary, and like they seem to be getting in the neck from all directions.
Absolutely.
Which is disgusting. It's heartbreaking, seeing the struggle of those young people, and it's all because of stigma, of attitudes, of misunderstandings, misinterpretations, all sorts of stuff like that. So in some ways, particularly for trans and non-binary young people, it seems to me that they're going through what I was going through 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
And you're kind of thinking, frankly, that shit's still going on.
Mm-hmm.
Heartbreaking.
It is, that part of it is really heartbreaking, and I think I don't know the statistics at the minute. I used to be a lot more up on my science about it all, but I don't know what the statistics are around like the rise of HIV and AIDS again, and for me, the rationalisation I always had in my head, I don't know whether it was some theory or if there is a theory around this, around why it was so prevalent within particularly the gay men's community, that was because there was that real stigma and shame around, your sexual practices or your sexual orientation or whatever. So is that what's going to happen now to trans young people or non-binary young people, because there's that sense of shame around them being people? Is that what's going to happen? And there's going to be an upsurge in STIs. It's a question, that's something that I would be interested to find out what the answer is. Maybe have to Google it.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things historically, of course, was the whole gay plague thing, and God's judgment on gay people. And I remember some of us used to think, well, he must be awful fond of lesbians, because there's not the same degree of incidence. There was never the same degree of incidence because of differences in sexual practices.
Yeah.
So we never got any of that sort of Christian lobby explaining why God was so enamoured of lesbians. You left us out of it.
You're so the chosen people.
See, it helps to be invisible sometimes.
But, well, there's also that, there's the invisibility factor with it. And probably in my own head thinking, I think people were nearly disgusted by gay men more than they were. I mean, even the conversation around the age of consent around young women and lesbians, there wasn't an age of consent for so many years because, Queen Victoria thought, women wouldn't do that.
Yes, that's right. Well, we weren't included in the legislation.
So there's all that, even that is a different argument altogether again. So the gay men get the spotlight and the stigma and the shame, and lesbian and gay women get ignored. And bisexual people, what even are they?
Or else it's seen as some sort of like pornographic turn on as
well.
well.
Yeah, no, sure, that's all you're doing.
We can have starring roles there.
Absolutely.